Welcome back to AM Sports Cover 4. I did want to get on here and talk a little bit about the game yesterday, Florida State versus Georgia Tech. I was going to give an instant reaction, but I decided not to because I didn't want to. Sometimes it's just better to sit back and kind of think on it first before you actually react to something. So I wanted to do that first because I didn't want to be too harsh. So Florida State loses to Georgia Tech 24-21 in a very disappointing performance as far as I'm concerned. And I want to start with the offense. So after the first drive, which was a scripted drive, the offense didn't look good in my opinion whatsoever. We were told that the offensive line would be one of the best offensive lines in the ACC. That did not appear to be the case in my personal opinion. We failed to get push on the offensive line. We could not run the ball, and to be quite honest with you, pass protection looked a bit suspect as well, particularly on that right side. Jeremiah Byers did not seem to do well in the game. We put in Rob Scott for a little bit. He got burnt a few times as well, and it just felt like DJ never had the opportunity to have enough time to find open receivers, and when he did, he was able to find them. As far as I'm concerned, I know that there's a lot of negative reactions in terms of DJU. This is who DJU is. He's inconsistent. If he was better, he'd be in the NFL, so forth and so on. And all of those things may very well be true, but I didn't see this as a loss for DJ, meaning I didn't see DJ as the primary reason why the offense didn't perform up to the level that we would have expected. To be quite honest, I felt that it was more so the line, and then it was also the approach from Mike Norvell. Now, full disclosure, Mike Norvell is going to be privy to information that I'm not privy to, that anyone else is privy to as well. So we're going to see a lot of, I don't want to call them so-called experts or anything like that. They definitely know a lot more about football than I do, but even with their understanding and knowledge of football, there are certain aspects that are going on within that program that, we're not aware of, and therefore we can't accurately say why Norvell did what it was he did. But Norvell seemed somewhat tentative in terms of wanting to attack, unsure of how they should attack. They seemed reserved. They seem to not have an identity on offense. And you got DJU, who is, someone that we've been told all offseason is going to bring that vertical threat that we did not see last year. Not only that, we have been told that this is the biggest, fastest team Florida State has had under the Mike Norvell tenure. Yet, we didn't play that way. We played in a way where we continued to try to run the ball when it was ineffective. And it seems like Georgia Tech was loading the box. And if they are, then you need to start to pick them apart. You need to start throwing the ball. And we failed to do so at any point in the game outside of maybe that last drive. And even in that drive, we were still trying to run the ball. Like the last possession, right before we got to the 1 yard line, I believe we tried to run it, lost yards. Then we tried to run it again, maybe got 2 or 3 yards, then tried to run it again and maybe got a yard before he found Benson, and we got to the 1 yard line. So I did not understand the game plan. Now, again, Mike Norvell is privy to information that I am not privy to. So I totally understand that, get it, respect it. However, from the outside looking in, I simply cannot understand why we approach the game in that manner. One thing I will say is that all during the offseason, we have been told that the wide receiver group was not too great. That appears to be the case. Benson was the only one to me that could get any kind of separation. Ja'Kai Douglas ended up being your best receiver yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. And even on some of those catches, they were close and contested to some extent. So the receiver room, I mean, they have to do better. We got Kentron's been there for a while. Williamson has been there for a while. Neither one of these gentlemen have stepped up their game. And I noticed that Hakeem Williams didn't even play yesterday. He was on the sideline, so I don't know what's going on there. But overall, that group is the most concerning group that we have on the offensive side of the ball, and just the hesitancy, I believe, did us in yesterday. Now moving to the defensive side of the ball, that front seven was absolutely atrocious. And the individuals that I want to specifically call out, Darrell Jackson, Farmer, and Pat Payton. Those were the three gentlemen that over the last two off seasons threatened to leave. They were the three that were looking to go down to Miami for more NIL money, all of that. And those individuals, particularly I'm going to focus on Patrick Payton, to me did not show up. The reason why I give Darrell Jackson and Farmer a bit more of a pass, and I got to go back and really watch the game, but I saw a lot of instances where they were being double teamed, Farmer and Jackson. Pat Payton, as a number one, should have been tearing off on the edge, and he wasn't. And as far as Marvin Jones Jr. is concerned, like, he had a couple of nice little moves in there. But I hadn't heard much about him during the offseason, so I wasn't expecting a whole lot from him. But with Darrell Jackson and Farmer getting double teamed, you would have expected that the linebackers needed to eat at that point. Blake Nicholson, to me, and again, I got to go back and watch it, but Blake Nicholson, to me, was the only linebacker that looked like they did anything worth a damn. I mean, Lundy did have that one where he shot the gap and was able to get a tackle for loss, but Lundy looked extremely slow in coverage, which he's always looked slow, but they were unable to take advantage of it to the same extent we saw Georgia Tech last night. But those linebackers, they didn't do anything. But when I think about last year when we played Georgia, one of the reasons why I never bought into the hype that the defensive line was going to be one of the best in the country or the best in the ACC, the reason why I didn't buy into that is because a lot of those players played. Lundy played in that game, if I remember correctly. I know Farmer didn't. He had a hand injury. Darrell Jackson did play. Pat Payton played. They did nothing against Georgia. I think Pat Payton may have had one play against Georgia. So I never thought that they were going to. Now, teams are allowed to get better. Players are allowed to get better. So they could have taken a step, but the whole notion that Pat Payton was going to be like this number one option that could have been a first round NFL draft, I didn't see it. I was going to need to see it and see him take that step. And yesterday, it kind of ended up exactly the way I thought it might end up. So that was porous. I do give the line I do feel like because the line was getting double teamed, some people were saying that the line was getting destroyed. I don't think the line necessarily got destroyed. Georgia Tech, their offensive line is relatively good. I felt that Farmer and Jackson, again, I got to go back and look, but I think they got double teamed. But if they're getting double teamed, then that means the linebackers got to get busy. They got to eat, man. And the linebackers didn't eat. They did nothing. It's hard to really say much about the defensive backs because they didn't get challenged as much. Earl Little Jr., that's one thing I did notice. Earl Little Jr. was out there maybe for like a few snaps. I don't know how many snaps he was out there for, but he looked incredibly slow. Now, I don't know if this is a situation where he simply is still somewhat affected by some injuries that I heard he had during the fall camp, but he looked incredibly slow. Kevin Knowles continues to get burnt. And that was the tackling was horrible. The tackling was horrendous. Usually you expect the tackling to be not as good the first game of the year because they're not necessarily tackling in practice and things of that nature. But for whatever reason, Georgia Tech was tackling well, and Florida State tackles were atrocious. I mean, it's like Florida State in many instances would make contact back beyond or behind the line of scrimmage, and whether it was the running back, the quarterback, they were still getting yards after contact. I mean, it was ridiculous how we could not bring down that quarterback or the running back or anybody that was running, it seemed like. So terrible tackling. I don't know why we continue to, like, we should have started bringing a better blitz package or additional blitz, in my opinion, because we wanted to, it seemed like we were relying on the front four to continue to like win the game for us, and they clearly couldn't, because the linebackers weren't shooting, and we should have just started blitzing or something. It just, we looked bad there. And as a matter of fact, there was a lot of things that it just felt like the coaching staff went in there with the idea that this was going to work and didn't have a plan B or C, or at the point in which they started trying to execute a plan B or C, it was already too late. And then on that last drive, which was very disappointing to me, you let these guys drive all the way down, and when they make a mistake and you have an opportunity to go into overtime, on that last play, you let them get 8, 9, 10 yards, whatever it was, to put them back in field goal position where the guy actually made it. The field goal was actually veering to the left, and there was an opportunity there for him to miss, specifically if they wouldn't have gotten all those yards and we couldn't get one stop. I mean, listen, I'm not calling for any coaches to be fired, although I do believe that there's some coaches that need to be replaced, because I think a lot of this is a symptom of poor recruiting. We've relied on the transfer portal, and that's fine. I think that was the right move. However, you got to continue to recruit so that behind those exiting players that we had, we lost 10 players to the NFL. Behind those players, you got a crop of individuals that are coming up, and they're now ready to move and step into their place. And as I was telling a lot of people last year, when Georgia put in their backups and we had in our backups, they were like, well, it's backup against backup. No, Georgia's backups are individuals that have been, not only are they talented, but they're individuals that have been in the program 3 years, some 4 years, 2 years. Our backups had been in our program for less than a year. They were like freshmen. They were good freshmen, but they were 4 stars, some 5 stars, but they hadn't been in the program long. So we have a gap there, specifically along the front 7 for the defensive line, as well as the offensive line. The recruiting just has not been great. And so I believe that that's a symptom of it, and that's part of the reason why I believe they should replace some coaches. But I'm not going to call out any specific coach for this particular loss. But Mike has to get back into the lab, and they have to look at what they have in terms of their talent. You got to utilize DJU for who he is and what he brings. Running the ball is an aspect of what DJU can do, but he was brought in to be a vertical threat. And if you were telling us that you have the biggest, fastest team, and you brought all this speed, Brown, Benson, you got all this speed out there, yet we're not effectively utilizing it, then what's the point? What is the point? It felt like the passing game did not really develop over the fall camp, and Mike didn't really want to go to it, so he thought he could win the game by just running the ball, and he couldn't, so he had to go to something else, right? And he chose not to until the very end. So I'm very disappointed in the loss. I'm not going to come on here and hammer the team or anything of that nature. I do want to see what they look like against Boston College, but Mike is going to have to step it up. Adam Fuller is going to have to step it up. They're going to have to figure out how to utilize his team most effectively. You say you got a big, talented team. We saw Nick Saban say the team looks good. Well, if they look good, you're going to have to execute. You can't look like Tarzan and play like Jane. So those are my thoughts. You guys tell me what you think in the comment section. Don't forget to hate, like, comment, and subscribe. This is AM Sports Cover 4, and I am out.